Hello and welcome to our next module. In our last module, we really talked about what the underlying issue was, that really was bringing the colonies closer to a break with Britain. Now we're going to talk about in this module what are some of those specific events that did lead to that break with Britain. First of all, the relationship between Britain and colonies was superior subordinate. We really talked a little bit in the last module and around this. And then secondly, the lack of control of the colonies over colonies. All right. Again, we touched on that a little bit in the last module, but I do like to pause here and talk about two specific things. Taxation without representation. If you remember the module, we talked about the Magna Carta when we reviewed that, all the way back to the Magna Carta. In that document, taxation with representation was a principle that just permeated the British tradition. Now, one quick note, when it came down to it, that famous act that Parliament passed, they passed it, we got lathered up, then they rescinded it. That tax was never levied, but the damage was done. The second thing I'd like to mention here is quartering of soldiers. This is something that when I ask my classes, what is quartering of soldiers? More often than not, nobody knows what it is, which is actually a very good thing if you would bring a founding father in a time machine today and ask and show them that. Basically, quartering of soldiers is the obligation to house soldiers within your home. All right. There are really two reasons for this, and one is if you are overseeing the community and you put soldiers within the homes of the members of that community, guess what you don't have to build? Barracks. So there's an economic reason for that. You can save some money that way. But more importantly, it's an issue of control. I always tell people years and years ago, I was a bad parent. We were on vacation. I took my kids to a museum. Okay, yeah. Anyway, it's down near the coast, but it was actually a pretty cool museum. But within that museum, they had a replica of a colonial home. And really, it was tiny. And so you have to think, unlike today, where if someone was in your house, you could run away to the bonus room or the basement and call and say, I can't believe so-and-so's in my house. Back then, no. When someone was in your home, they were sitting right there. So one of two things was going to happen. Either you were just going to still talk about the events of the day, and that soldier was going to report back on everything that he heard from the night before to his superiors that next morning, or was probably more likely, people just didn't talk. So again, it was a way of controlling the population. All right. The First Continental Congress, very important here. A couple bullet points on this. It was originally intended to restore harmony when they brought all the colonies together. Again, it was originally to try to figure out how do we make this thing work? How do we fix it? All right. Well, what they wound up doing, they adopted the Declaration of Rights that listed the violation of rights of the colonies. But let's talk about this just for another minute. What I don't have here on the bullet point list is the fact that what really was important about the First Continental Congress is prior to this moment, the colonies never really interacted with each other. They were pretty much standalone. They didn't coordinate, cooperate in any political area. This was the first time they did so. All right. Now, with that, I'm going to hit the pause button for a second. And there's something that at this point I usually like to mention. It's not exactly maybe the most scholarly thing in the world, but it is worth mentioning at the same time. I've seen a couple of documentaries that have actually addressed this. Is that most people couldn't read back in the day, and I always just kind of say, what was the internet of the day? It was the tavern. What was in the tavern? Yes, not a loaded question. Well, sometimes, we may refer to alcohol as liquid courage. And there were some stories about founding fathers and some of the work that was being done for the revolution and in preparation of it, that it was done in the tavern. And some of the events may have been affected by, um, well, I'll let you connect those dots. So again, it's just worth mentioning. There are a couple of documentaries out there and around that. We don't usually talk about that, but I did say let's just hit the pause button, and now let's restart the regularly scheduled program. Now, violence. We typically think about the Boston Massacre. Now, what I want you to consider and remember again, we said this in the last module. If I'm walking the streets of Boston in 1773, I don't think of myself as American. I think of myself as British. So when we think about the violence that's going on here, you're talking about the British troops firing on its own citizens. And so I really can't think of a good, modern day equivalent to that, kind of put a current context of it. But I know back in the late 60s, we had at Kent State University the National Guard troops that fired on and killed several protesting students. But what if you lived in the Virgin Islands, American holdings, not a state. You came home from work one day and heard that American troops fired on and killed citizens there in the streets. So it's again, it's not an American versus British thing. We aren't there yet. This is still at this point in time, the citizens view themselves as British citizens. The Second Continental Congress. I always like to joke around, well, if you have a first, and then by default, you typically have a second. But what we see here is where this Second Continental Congress established a national government of sorts, okay, with the authority to raise troops, print money, and establish foreign relations. Now, really, when you think about it, there's only one country you're talking about, that's France. And that's one thing we'll be talking about a little bit later. Britain was on the verge of war with France at this time. And there's an old saying, the enemy of your enemy is your friend. So the Second Continental Congress attempted to establish relations with France to receive some sort of aid, get some sort of aid. Okay? And lastly here, Thomas Paine's common sense, believed to have swayed public opinion for a formal break. Now, one thing we have to understand, I'm undoing a little bit of Schoolhouse Rock here for a second. When you looked at Schoolhouse Rock when you were a kid, or whatever our thoughts around that may be, is that there was a groundswell, overwhelming support to break with Britain. We didn't have that. We did not have that. It was barely 50-50 split. So about as many people who wanted independence, you had about as many people who didn't. All right. And a lot of political scientists, a lot of scholars look at Thomas Paine's common sense. It was just a pamphlet, piece of propaganda. They look at that as that last straw, as that one event that tipped it just in favor enough for the colonists to want to push for independence. All right. So with that, that's the end of this module. And again, as always, you can go back, review this, start, stop, pause, and so forth. With that, that's the end of this module, and we'll pick it up with the next one. Thank you.